Welcome, bienvenidos. We're talking today about some more kinds of fiction. Yesterday we learned about some realistic fiction. We learned about historical fiction and westerns, and today we're going to learn about some more kinds of fiction. One more time, fiction means not true or fake. Ficción significa que algo no es verdadero o es falso. Una manera de recordar es decir ficción es falso. Fiction is fake. That's an easy way to remember. Fiction, fake, okay? There are lots of different kinds of fiction, and let's talk about some. Science fiction. Stories tell about the science and technology of the future. Ciencia ficción es del tecnológico y ciencia del futuro. Science fictions can't be true. They're not realistic fiction, but they could come true in the future. We just don't know. Some places you might find in a science fiction story, some science fiction settings could be a spaceship, science lab, or alien planet. Characters in a science fiction story might be people like an astronaut, alien, scientist, or robot. I want you to pause the video, pausa el video, and tell me, if you can, which of these is not science fiction. ¿Cuál no es ciencia ficción? All right, welcome back. Flight to the Mushroom Planet has two boys finding a newspaper advertisement looking for a home-built spaceship. I'm betting that based on this cover with the spaceship and that word spaceship, that we're talking about future technology. We are talking about science fiction. So let's keep looking. Dragon Masters has a dragon on the front of it. It's got dragons, a king, a wizard, and magic. None of those has to do with technology and science. I don't see anything in here about science or technology or the future. It's all about castles and magic. So I don't think that is science fiction. Aliens for Breakfast is about a boy who discovers that his bowl of Alien Crisp cereal has real aliens in it. I'm thinking this is science fiction. Aliens are something that could exist, but we don't know about yet, something that we're waiting for science to tell us about. So, this is science fiction. Dragon Masters is something else. Let's find out what that something else is. Dragon Masters is fantasy. Fantasia. Fantasy stories are about magical people or creatures, often in a different, magical world. Notice that keyword, magic. Fantasía es sobre la cosa mágica. Mágica. Fantasy stories will never be true unless magic really exists, which it doesn't, I'm sorry to say. Fantasy places. A magic castle, a cave with a genie, or an enchanted forest. These are the kinds of places you might find in a fantasy book. Fantasy creatures, you might find these in your book as well. A wizard, an elf, a fairy, a unicorn. Okay, these are all kinds of things we might find in a fantasy novel. So which one is not fantasy? Pause the video and see if you can figure this out. Welcome back. Up here we have a science fiction novel. It's about kids in a spaceship. Dragon Masters is fantasy, and this down here is also fantasy, although it's a little harder to tell. The description doesn't talk about magic, but it does say that this buck that the girl meets is no ordinary deer, and it turns out Allie is no ordinary girl, so there's something magical going on there. All right. Horror stories create feelings of fear, dread, repulsion, and terror. So we're talking about fear, oh no, or repulsion, ugh, gross. Horror stories are about making you feel bad, basically. Fun fact, horror stories can be realistic. Like, we could talk about a crime story where someone gets murdered or something terrible happens to someone and we might be horrified, we might feel fear about it. Or it could be non-realistic. It could be like a fantasy story about magical, evil creatures like ghosts or vampires. In a horror story, you might find things like a haunted castle or a graveyard. And you might find characters like a vampire, a ghost, or a witch in a horror story. Take a look here and see if you can figure out which of these is not a horror story, or is a horror story. One of these is a horror story and the other two are not. Which one is? Pause the video and see if you can figure it out. So, Harry Potter is fantasy. It's about a boy and his broom. It's not a horror story. There's no graveyards or ghosts in here, at least not scary ones. The Graveyard Book is about a scary topic. It's about a kid who lives in a graveyard. This guy looks pretty scary. He might even be a vampire or a ghost, so I'm thinking that is our horror story. Space Academy is science fiction. It's about an astronaut in outer space, and we can see that just from looking at the cover. Last type of story is a mystery. In mysteries, characters try to solve a question, riddle, or puzzle, usually some kind of crime. En una misteria, los caracteres están tratando de resolver una pregunta, una misteria. You might find a police station or a crime scene in a mystery, and you might find a police officer, a private detective, or a criminal in mysteries. Which of these covers is probably a mystery and why? ¿Cuál es una misteria y por qué? Welcome back. Alice Detective is a mystery. It's got the word detective right there in the title. We see her, she's ready to solve some kind of crime or mystery. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a horror story, and Henry's Freedom Box, a true story of the Underground Railroad, that's about something true that happened in the past. It's realistic fiction, and it's a historical fiction novel. All right, thanks for joining me for today's reading lesson. Keep watching the videos down below for the rest of today's reading.